Hey everybody, welcome back. And we're going to be doing another math video today. Today we are going to be taking a look at rounding numbers. We're going to round numbers to the tens place, the hundreds place, and even the thousands place. Sounds like a lot, but you know what? Once you know the steps, it's actually a really easy thing to do. And you can round any number at all once you know these steps. So we're going to jump right into it. Number one, our first step, and we are rounding numbers. Okay, first of all, rounding numbers is just trying to get a number that is closest to something. Okay, if you want to get it to the closest 10, okay, that's rounding to the nearest 10. You want to get it to the closest 100. Okay, maybe I want to say I want to round 70 to the closest 100. Well, is that closer to 0 or is it closer to 100? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Maybe I want to round 64 to the nearest 10. Well, is 64 closer to 60 or is it closer to 70? That's what we're going to try to figure out today. Yeah, and that's what we're asking for when we are rounding numbers. So the first thing I want you to do, and I rewrote part of this because it gets a little confusing when you're using before and after, that kind of stuff. Where is that number? Step one, I want you to look at the number that is one place to the right of the number that you are rounding. Okay, so if you're going to be rounding to the nearest 10, okay, so we're going to look at the tens place, but then we're going to look immediately to the right of that tens place, okay, because the number to the right of that number is going to tell you where we are going to round, what we're going to round to. So that is step one. Step two, you need to decide if the number to the right of the number you're rounding, okay, in the example of rounding to the nearest 10, okay, is the number in the ones place between 0 and 4, or is that number between 5 and 9? That's what we need to figure out. If it's between 0 and 4, then the number that you are rounding is going to stay the same. It's not going to go up. Okay, so if you are going to be rounding 24 to the nearest 10, that number falls between 0 and 4. Okay, the 4 after the 2. Okay, the 2 is in the tens place, 4 is in the ones. We're going to look at the 1. And that 4 falls between 0 and 4. So we're just going to keep that 2 the same. However, if it is a number between 5 and 9, then we're going to make a slight change. Then we're going to increase that number that we're rounding by 1. We're going to make that number go up by 1. Okay? And you'll see what I mean in just a little bit here. Okay? And then step 3, everything after the number that you're rounding then turns into a 0. It's like magic. Don't forget to do your magic. Okay? Everything else becomes a donut. Everything else becomes a 0 after that number that you rounded. So, what do I mean? That's a great question. Thank you for asking. Down here, example number 1. They want us to round each number to the nearest 10 and the nearest 100. They even gave us this number line right down here, okay? And we're going to use that number line. If I can push it up far enough. There we go. Yeah, so I don't want you to see those next ones yet. Don't get ahead of me. Number 1, they want us to round 166 to the nearest 10 and to the nearest 100, okay? So the nearest 10, they want us to look at this tens place, and then we are going to look at that 6. Okay, the ones place. So this number right here is the one that's either going to change or it's going to stay the same. It's either going to stay a 6 if the next number is between 0 and 4, or it's going to go up by 1 and turn into a 7 if this number is between 5 and 9. Yeah? Let's find out what it is. Right now, looking at that 6, we know that next number is a 6. Is 6 between 0 and 4, or is it between 5 and 9? Well, 6 is 1 more than 5, so it falls in that range. So what are we going to do to that 6 right there? We're going to round it up and turn it into a 7. Okay? So everything before that stays the same. We're going to keep that 1 right there. However, that 6 becomes a 7 because that 1's place was between 5 and 9. We're going to round it up to a 7. And then everything else after our place that we're rounding turns into a 0. Okay? So it turns into 170. Okay, so 166 rounded to the nearest 10 is 170. Makes sense so far, hopefully. Now we're going to do the same thing with 100. We're going to look at the same number, and I'm going to write it over here, a fresh 166. That 166, we're rounding to the 100, so we're going to look at that hundreds place. We're going to underline that, but we are going to look at the number after that. Okay? So that 1 is either going to stay a 1 or it's going to turn into a 6. That's what we're going to find out. Or turn into a 2, I'm sorry. It's going to either stay a 1 or it's going to turn into a 2. So we're going to see what that is. 6 right here in the tens place. That is the place that's going to determine whether we stay the same or go up. Is that 6 more, or does it fall into that 0 to 4 range? Or does it fall into the 5 to 9 range? Well, it is more than 5, which means, you know what? We're going to be increasing that by 1. Okay? So our 1 is going to turn into a 2, and everything else after that is going to become a donut. It's going to become a 0. Okay? Lots of donuts there. Okay? So far, so good. Now we got a lot of problems down here, but we're going to fly right through these because hopefully this is making sense, but we're still going to step by step take a look at these. Okay? Number 2, tens and hundred spot. One more time. Well, here's our tens. That's the number we're going to look at. Does that 9 fall between 0 and 4 or between 5 and 9? Well, it is a 9, which means that's going to go up. 7 stays the same. 0 turns into a 1. Everything else turns into a donut. Okay? Hundred spot, we look at the 7, and again, we'll write it over here, so we have a separate one to work with. We're looking at the 100 spot. This is what's going to tell us whether to round up or stay the same. Okay? 0 falls between 0 and 4, which tells us, hey, we're not going to change anything. It's just going to stay the same. And everything else after that becomes a 0. Beautiful. So far, so good. 185. First of all, look at the 10. That 5 in the 1 spot is going to help us determine whether that 8 stays an 8 or whether it goes up to 9. Well, 5 falls into that second group. Okay, so we're going to move that 8 up. 1 stays the same. That 8 turns into a 9. And everything else after becomes a 0. 100, same deal. Okay, 185. Except we're going to look at the 1. That 8 is going to tell us what we're doing with that 1. 8 falls between 5 and 9, so that 1 is going to move up. It's going to turn into a 2. It will increase by 1. And everything else becomes a 0. Good stuff. Continuing on, 234. Well, looking at the 10 spot, that 4 is going to help us determine whether that 3 goes up or stays the same. Well, 4 goes between 0 and 4. So everything before the number we're rounding stays the same. 3 is going to stay the same this time. And everything else turns into a 0. 234. Looking at the hundreds place, that 3 is going to tell us, well, 3 falls between 0 and 4, so 2 stays the same then, does not go up. And everything else turns into a donut, into a 0. 561, looking at the tens, that 1's going to tell us, does it go up or down? Well, 1 falls between 0 and 4, so 5 doesn't change. The 6 will stay the same. Everything else turns into a donut. Hundreds, 561. That's the number we're rounding. 6 is going to tell us what we're going to do to that number. 6 falls between 5 and 9, that bigger group, which tells us that 5 is going to turn into a 6. Everything else turns into a 0. More donuts. Delicious. I'm getting hungry at this point. Okay, next one, 6. We have 478. We're looking at the tens. That 8's going to tell us what we're going to do. 4 stays the same, but does that 7 stay the same or does it go up by 1? Well, 8 falls between 5 and 9, so that 7 is going to turn into an 8. It's going to increase by 1. And everything else after turns into a 0. And the 100 spot over here for 478. Looking at the hundreds, 7's going to tell us what we're going to do to that hundreds place. Well, 7 falls between 5 and 9. So 4 turns into a 5. Everything else afterwards turns into a donut. More zeros. So that's rounding to the tens and the hundreds. Not so bad, right? Let's get scary. We're going to flip the page. We are literally going to turn the page. We're going to look at the thousands place now, which really is not that much different. Okay? And you'll see in just a moment what I mean. All we're doing is adding one more digit to our number. Okay? It's not so bad. We have thousands, hundreds, tens, and ones this time instead of hundreds, tens, and ones. Okay? But we're rounding to the nearest thousand, which tells me, okay, we're going to look at the thousands place. And that next number in the hundreds is going to tell us what we're going to round it to. Okay? Just like we were doing before. No different. So 5 is either going to stay the same or it's going to increase by 1. That 8 tells us what we're going to do. Okay? 8, does that fall into the 0 through 4, which means we're going to keep it a 5? Or does it fall into the 5 through 9, which means that we are going to increase our 5 to a 6? Falls into the bigger group. So, becomes a 6. Everything else, just like before, turns into a donut, turns into a 0. Number 2, same thing. We're going to mark this thousands place, and I highly encourage you, do this on your paper. When you're practicing these, write them out, underline the number you're rounding, draw an arrow to the next number. That's going to help you a lot. It's going to help you organize your thoughts. It's going to let you see what you're doing. It's going to let your teacher, your parents, see what you are doing. It's going to make your life a lot easier. 3 is the number that we're going to be rounding. That 0 is going to tell us what we're going to do to it. 0 goes into the 0 through 4 group, which means that 3 is not going to change at all. That 3 is going to continue to be a 3. Everything else afterwards becomes a 0. Taking a look at number 3. Underline the spot that we are rounding. Draw an arrow to what's going to tell us which direction to round. 9 is between 5 and 9, bigger group, which tells me, hey, that 1 is going to turn into a 2. Everything else becomes a 0. And finally, from this group, once again, we have a 4 in the thousands place. We go and draw an arrow to the 5. That 5 falls in between 5 and 9. So the 4 is going to turn into a 5. And everything else afterward turns into a 0. Capiche? Understand? Hopefully. This is making sense thus far. Let's fly through these last 9, not 6 problems, these last 9 problems, and then we're going to be good to go. All right, again, we're rounding to the nearest thousand with all of these problems. So, underline, draw an arrow, 4 falls into the first group, 2,000 is where we're going to round. Underline the 2, draw an arrow to the 3, 3 falls between 0 and 4, 2 stays the same. Everything else becomes a 0. Here we go. Underline the 1, that's what we are rounding. Looking at the 2 now, 2 falls between 0 and 4. That tells me, okay, 1's going to stay right where it is. Will not increase. All right, these last 6, I'm going to pause for just a second. Now would be a good time for you to pause, and I will give you a second to do so, and then work these last 6 problems out. And then once you are done, unpause, and we will continue. And I'm just going to go through and give you the answers to these last 6. So pause now if you would like. And we're back. Here we go. 7,022. 7 is the number we are rounding. That 0 tells me that 7's going to stay the same. Zeros afterwards. 6 we are rounding. Going to number 6. 6 falls between 5 and 9, which means 7 is going to become our new 1,000. Everything else is a 0. 7, looking at the 9, 9 falls between 5 and 9. which tells me that 7 is going to increase to 8. Everything else becomes a 0. 4 is the number we're rounding. Looking at the 7 then, 7 falls between 5 and 9. That 4 is going to turn into a 5. Everything else turns into a 0. 5 is the rounding number. Looking at the 8 though, 8 falls between 5 and 9, which tells me 6 is going to be our new 1,000 number. That 5 is going to increase. And our last one, 3 is the number we are rounding. That 9 is going to tell us what we're going to turn it into. And in this case, 5 through 9, yes, 9 does fit that category. That 3 will turn into a 4. And that whole number will become 4,000. Beautiful. Hopefully you did well on those. Hopefully these are making sense. As always, if you have any other questions that come along with these type of problems, feel free to drop them in the comments below. You can apply this stuff to any rounding problem. If you're older and you're starting to get to decimals, it's going to be the exact same thing. Okay? Underline the number that you're rounding. Look at the number immediately to the right of that. And that's going to tell you what you're going to round that number to. Everything to the left stays the same. You determine if that number that you're rounding goes up or stays the same. And everything else afterwards turns into a 0. You can do that with any number that you are going to round. You can apply this type of rounding to any rounding problem that you are going to have. But again, feel free, drop another question in the comments if you've got one. If you have another video you would like to see me make, whether it's math, whether it's science, whether it's reading, whatever it happens to be, I am happy to make videos for you. I want to make sure that you are understanding school stuff better. If you have questions or you're struggling with a certain idea, I'm here to help you out. And parents, same with you. If you're having a hard time understanding what's going on in school, let me know. I want to make a video to help you as well. Not just your students, but you as well. Because you are your students' teachers at home. So if you have any problems, any questions, feel free, drop something in the comments below. And I would love to make a video for you as well. But thank you for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I hope you'll tune into the next video. I'm kind of on a roll of making videos right now. Got plenty of time. This whole quarantine situation, the whole virus pandemic going on, we got some time. So hopefully I am able to help you in the present or in the future, whether it's a school year or a future school year. So thank you for watching. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and until next time, you all take care.